Hello, in this video we're going to demonstrate how to use the rectangle class in JavaFX to draw shapes in our programs. So over in Eclipse we'll create a new Java project and I will call this show rectangle. We'll add to this project a class called show rectangle and we will start coding. The first thing we'll do is make our show rectangle class extend from application, and we will write our start method. Okay, so what we're going to do inside our start method is create a pane that we're going to use to draw a bunch of rectangles inside. So because we're going to be manually positioning our rectangles, just the regular plain old pane class is fine. We'll use the default constructor to construct this. Next up, we're going to create a rectangle. So rectangle and shapes more generally in JavaFX are a very useful way of drawing things in our Java applications that need to be on screen but aren't necessarily controls that we want to use. So, you know, having buttons and text fields and all these kind of things to get the user control is a good thing, of course, but sometimes we just need to draw things, whether that is a rectangle or something more complicated like a line drawing or an image or anything. Anyway, we're going to be using rectangles in this video, and we're going to use the rectangle class inside javafx.scene.shape. And we'll have a variable that's a rectangle called R1. We're going to build a new rectangle object, and the constructor we're going to use takes 4 parameters. You can see there are a few parameters, a few constructors here. We're interested in this one, which takes an X and Y position for the rectangle, and then the width and height of the rectangle as well. So that's how we're going to construct our rectangle. And the coordinates we're going to pass in is 25 in X and 10 in Y. Then the width is going to be 60 and the height 30. Now, there are a lot of properties we can use to control exactly how our rectangle gets drawn. We can change the color of both the stroke or the line that's used to draw the rectangle and the fill color. So let's do that now. r1.setStroke is the method we want to call to change the outline color, and we can pass in a color from the color class, for example black. We can set the fill in a very similar way, and we'll set this to white. Okay, so next up we're going to add our rectangle to our pane. So before we do that, we'll add a label, a text label, just to show what rectangle we're doing, because we're going to add a bunch of rectangles. So pane.getChildren.add a new text item, and the coordinates are going to be 10 and 27, and the string we're going to render is just going to be R1. Next up, we're going to get our children again from the pane and add the rectangle we just created. What we're going to do now, actually, I need to fix this import. What we're going to do now is set up our scene and our stage to get this rendering on the screen. So here's our scene object. It takes in the pane as its default object, and the size of our window will be 250 by 150. Next up, we will set our primary stage up. So set the title, set the scene, and show our primary stage. Okay, so now we'll jump out of our start method and create a main method. And we'll call launch. Okay, so now we have enough that we can run our program and see our rectangle on screen. So let's have a look. And there it is. There is R1. We've got a rectangle that's a black outline, a white fill, and it's positioned at the location we specified. So that's great. Let's add a few more rectangles now to show some of the features that are available to us. So what we're going to do in the middle here is create a new rectangle object. We'll call this R2, and we'll use the same constructor as we did before, this time passing in 25 and 50 as its location, and then 60 and 30 as its width and height. So it's the same dimensions as R1, but in a different position. What we're going to do now is add this again. So what I'm going to do, we're actually going to label all of our rectangles. So I'll copy this and change the location to be 1067. And here is R2. We'll also add R2 to our pane. So now let's run our program and see what's happened. So here's the difference. With R1, we specifically we're specifically controlling the fill color and the stroke color. With our R2 rectangle, we left it as the default, and the default is to fill a black rectangle, which is fine. But so now we know how we can change the colors of our rectangle and the difference in rendering that it causes. Next up, let's create another rectangle. We'll call this R3. And we're going to position this at 25 and 90 in Y, and we're going to set it to the same dimensions again, so 60 and 30. This time, we're going to look at how we can do rounded corners of our rectangle, and JavaFX rectangle class makes this very easily. There are two methods that we're interested in here. One is called setArcWidth, and the other is called setArcHeight. And these two parameters together control the roundness of the corners of our rectangle. Let's have a look. R3.setArcWidth. Let's set this to 15. And then we'll do a similar thing with ArcHeight, but set it to 25. So we will end up with a rectangle that has rounded, but not uniformly rounded corners. We also need to, of course, add our rectangle. So our label for this one will be at 107. And the label, of course, will be R3, and we'll add R3. So let's run our program. And now you can see how the rounded corners have come into play. Because we specified a much larger height value, we have this kind of, I don't know, what would you call this? A capsule-shaped rectangle, I guess. So that's how the rounded corners work using setArcWidth and setArcHeight. What we're going to do now is have a for loop to add several rectangles, and we're going to basically rotate them. Again, rectangle allows us to, we can use the rectangle class to draw rotated rectangles just as easily as drawing any other shape. So let's have a for loop. Int I equals 0, I less than 4, I plus plus. Inside our for loop, we're going to create a rectangle object. And we'll position this at 150, and we'll set the size to be 130. And of course, I was not pressing the comma key then. I should really watch what I'm typing. Okay, next up, we're going to rotate our rectangle. And so we're going to use the setRotate method. And we're going to, the value we're going to pass in is I multiplied by 360, I should say, divided by 8. Now that we've done that, we're going to set our color to be a totally random color. So set the stroke to be color.color, lowercase c for the second one, and we're going to use 3 random values to choose our red, green, and blue. Forgot my parentheses there. Okay, next up we're going to set the fill to white. And add our rectangle to the pane. Okay, now that we have this for loop in place, let's run our program one last time. And you can see what we have here. We've got a series of rectangles being rotated around as they are added, and with a random color for their stroke property. So with that, that's it for this video. We've learnt how to use rectangles to draw shapes in JavaFX, and all of the other shape classes work in a similar way, obviously with different properties to choose from though. So with that, that's it for this video. Thanks a lot.